They had a happy family, but it all fell apart when her husband's ex-lover showed up. Welcome. Subscribe to the channel. Let's start the story. A cool, ocean-scented breeze blew through San Francisco as David returned home after a long day at work. His family home, standing on a secluded stretch of Pacific Ocean shoreline, always reminded him of the happiness he found in the arms of his wife Lisa and their 2-year-old son Henry. Those moments were priceless to him. One day, walking home, outside the door of his house, his heart sank. Standing in front of him was Emily, the woman who had once been his former lover. She held the hand of a little boy, whose gaze was filled with curiosity. "Emily," whispered David, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Emily smiled, but there was a twinkle of sadness in her eyes. "Hi, David," she said quietly. "We're back." David was dumbfounded. He hadn't seen Emily in years, and she was more than just an ex-girlfriend to him. But after a while, he'd married Lisa, and they'd had a son, and they'd bought the house they now lived in. David's gaze fell on the baby, and he realized that Emily had told the truth. "Who's that?" David asked, pointing to the little boy. "That's our son, Jake," Emily replied, and her voice shook with emotion. David found it hard to breathe. His hands were shaking, and the world around him seemed to be crumbling. He didn't know how to explain to Lisa that Emily was back and that they had a son. A storm of feelings, and thoughts began to surge through his soul. "Why did you come back?" he asked, trying to hide the confusion. For David, a vivid and incomprehensible chapter of his life had begun. While Lisa was at work and his son was being looked after by a nanny, he spent a lot of time with Emily. Their meetings had begun neutrally, discussing her return and the condition she'd found herself in since their separation. But gradually, the old feelings flared up again. Soon they were spending more and more time together, reminiscing about the past and swapping stories. In Emily's every smile and David's every glance, the passion they had long suppressed inside them shimmered. They found themselves prisoners of their own desires and urges. Their encounters grew bolder and more dangerous, and their passion grew more intense. Soon David couldn't help himself, and they spent the night together as they had in the days when they were in love. Hidden in the hotel, they once again felt the forbidden fire that they could not extinguish. But with each passionate encounter, David realized he was losing control of his life. He loved Lisa and his son, Henry, but his passion for Emily was leading him down the path of infidelity. He was torn between two women who had a special place in his heart. David realized that sooner or later an incredibly difficult choice would have to be made. Lisa began to suspect that something was wrong with her husband. She noticed that he became nervous. He returned late from work several times, and his gaze became aloof. It pained her to see David drifting away from her, so she decided to find out what was going on. One day, Lisa decided to follow David. She followed him when he left work and found herself in front of the hotel, where he often spent time with Emily. His wife sensed that something was wrong between them, and she needed to know the truth. When Lisa saw them in each other's arms, her heart sank. David and Emily stood there, as if in a vacuum, in a world that didn't include her. The looks they exchanged were so intimate that it hurt Lisa to even look at them. At that moment, she realized that her world had shattered. Lisa quietly came out of hiding, her legs barely holding her up. She couldn't believe what she had seen. All the way back home, her mind was blocked by tears and pain. She needed to make sense of this situation. After David's revelation, their home had become a cold place full of tension and misunderstandings. Lisa was devastated by her husband's infidelity and found it difficult to come to terms with what she had witnessed that day. It was obvious to her that her passion for Emily had become a wall between them that could not be broken down. David realized that he had lost Lisa's trust and permanently damaged his relationship with her. He felt deep shame for his actions and hated himself for cheating. However, he couldn't deny the feelings he was uncovering again by seeing Emily. The nights in their home began to be filled with long silences and noticeably tense conversations. Lisa wanted to understand why David had done this to her and how he was going to repair their relationship. David was confused and bewildered. He knew he had no answers that could assuage Lisa's pain. Soon the situation escalated. Lisa discovered that she was pregnant with their second child, and that moment was a turning point in their story. Now, not only was their family life in jeopardy, but also the future of this new little family member. It was at this moment, when they had to make an important decision regarding their future, that fate brought them a new blow. The decision to have a second child was a major turning point that needed to be made. Lisa eventually decided to keep the pregnancy and have a second child. This decision gave her hope that the new beginning and the arrival of the baby would change their family life for the better. She wanted to believe that David would be able to overcome his feelings for Emily and focus on his family. Meanwhile, the fate of Emily and her son Jake also began to take an unexpected direction. She made the decision not to break David's family and start a new life elsewhere. Emily and Jake left, despite David's tears, and pleas to stay. However, this story was not the end of the story. Tragic consequences followed for all the characters. A few weeks later, after Emily left, a terrible event occurred. Jake, her young son, ended up in the hospital after an accident in the new town. They had settled in. Jake had fallen off his bike and was seriously injured and in a coma. Emily was desperate and, with no other support, called David asking for help. David arrived at the hospital to support Emily in this difficult moment. He saw her trembling with fear and guilt and realized that despite everything, they both loved this child. Now they had to make difficult decisions about his future and fight for his life. After the tragic accident with Jake, the fate of the heroes took a new turn. Emily and David found themselves in the hospital, with a tense atmosphere around them. Jake was still in a coma, and his condition remained critical. In this difficult situation, Emily and David decided to join forces to save the little boy's life. They spent long nights at his bedside, praying and hoping for a miracle. This joint struggle brought them closer to each other, and they began to realize that the most important thing at this moment is to take care of Jake. Lisa also found herself in a difficult position. Her pregnancy became more complicated, and she had to be in the hospital under the care of doctors. She felt alone and abandoned, and this only added to her pain and frustration. Events unfolded rapidly, and the walls that had previously separated the characters began to crumble. Emily and David began to reveal to each other their deepest feelings and regrets for the past. They realized that they had both made mistakes and wrong actions, and that they needed to reconcile with themselves in order to help Jake. Lisa, while in the hospital, also began to think about her role in this complicated story. She realized that she had always loved David and was willing to forgive him for cheating on her if he was willing to come back to her. After weeks of fighting for Jake's life, the little boy's long-awaited moment of recovery had finally arrived. The doctors and parents breathed a sigh of relief as they saw him begin to recover. He was a source of hope and inspiration to all, and his improvement was a symbol that life was moving on. During this time, however, the family relationship between David and Lisa began to crumble. The pressures of past events and the inconsistencies in their relationship became unbearable. David realized that his feelings for Emily were still alive, and he decided to return to her. It was a difficult and painful decision, but he felt it was the only path to his own happiness. Pregnant Lisa and her 2-year-old son were left alone. She was left to deal with her grief and disappointment. She had to start a new chapter of her life, alone and with 2 children, hoping for a future she couldn't foresee. What do you think? Did David do the right thing? Write your opinion in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and rate the video with a like. Thank you.